Good morning and welcome to City Paper Live, Pittsburgh's first and only remaining podcast.
Hi, this is Amanda Waltz, Senior Arts and Entertainment Writer for the City Paper, and I'm here with Adam Hart.
Hello.
Hi, how are you, Adam?
Doing really well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
And Adam, very appropriately, since this is the month of October, we're going to talk horror, specifically Pittsburgh Zone. Well, I guess technically Pittsburgh Zone. He lived here for the majority of his life.
Yeah, it was his adopted city.
Yeah.
His beloved Steel City.
Yeah. Even though, was he born in Brooklyn?
The Bronx.
Bronx. Okay. So we are going to talk about George Romero. You are one of the organizers of Romero Lives, which is a pretty big festival that's running. I think it runs pretty much all year round. You guys do events all year round, but October is your prime month.
Yeah, we do programming and various things throughout the year, but 90% of our energy goes into October.
Yeah, as it should. So I wrote a story about Romero Lives recently. It's online for those of you who'd like to check it out. Just kind of giving an outline of all the films and events that are going on that people can expect. But we're just going to talk about it in a little more detail.
Yeah.
Because there's some surprises for this particular one. Now, this is something that launched last year because it was the 50th anniversary of the release of Night of the Living Dead.
Right.
And so this is kind of a continuation of that, but it's more about, I don't know, why don't you describe it? So I don't want to...
It's about expanding. It's about going beyond just Night of the Living Dead. But it's also trying to establish October in Pittsburgh as a time for honoring the legacy of George Romero, for celebrating horror, for celebrating zombies in the place where the modern zombie was born.
Yeah.
Or arguably where modern horror was born.
Yeah.
And, just kind of keeping up the fun in, remembering, this filmmaker who devoted his life to bringing films to Pittsburgh and to, carving out a film industry, on the backs of the undead.
On the backs of the undead. Our producer Josh is giggling. It is. If you're not from Pittsburgh or like me, I am not. So I moved here not knowing that Night of the Living Dead was filmed here, even though I had seen it. And I just thought that just kind of blew my mind. And, and that was sort of the catalyst for, and then you had Dawn of the Dead, and then he brought Creepshow here, and there was all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I think you can talk more about that.
Yeah. So I showed, I teach at Pitt, and I showed my class Night of the Living Dead a couple of weeks ago. And it was a unique experience because when references started being made to, local locations, to Pitt, if you're in Pittsburgh, proceed to the Oakland Medical Center.
Oh, wow.
The students they kind of lost it. I think they were vaguely aware that Night of the Living Dead had something to do with Pittsburgh. A lot of them had seen it before, but just being in that environment and having that recognition on the part of everybody was that was a blast.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. But here's the thing. We're talking about Romero's most notable works, obviously. Yeah. But you have one that is not notable that's showing during the festival. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
So we are making the premiere of the newly restored, quote-unquote, lost film of Romero called The Amusement Park, which he made in the early 70s. A lot of familiar Romero personnel are there behind the scenes and in front of the camera, including George, who makes a fun little cameo. But it is a very strange movie.
Yeah, considering that he's a horror director, I don't think he really strayed from that genre a whole lot. This is not a horror film in the traditional sense.
No, but it's clearly made by somebody who is like well versed in how to make a horror film.
Right.
It was commissioned by the Lutheran Services as a
Oh,
kind
wow.
of educational film about the dangers of aging in American society in the early 70s.
Right.
It was meant to sort of elicit, sympathy and to try to drive people to, volunteer and donate and that sort of thing.
Right.
And it is a wild movie.
You sent me some stills because
Yeah.
we talked about this for my story, and it looks very bleak. I mean, I haven't seen it, obviously.
Oh, it's very bleak. Yeah.
Yes, I can imagine the dangers of aging in the 70s.
Yeah, at a time, I mean, and it is a pretty revealing snapshot of the time when the social safety net was really precarious.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
And so it stars Lincoln Maisel, who was one of the lead actors in Martin, George Romero's Martin.
Oh, okay.
And whose son, I believe, was the conductor of the Pittsburgh Symphony. Like, that's why he was in Pittsburgh in the 70s.
Interesting. All right.
But it's this kind of almost like Bergman-esque allegory, but
Yeah.
made by George Romero. Like, he clearly saw this as an opportunity to be as creative, because it's a non-commercial film.
Right,
Like,
right.
to be as creative as he wanted to be. And
man.
so it's like an allegory in which the an old man walking through an amusement park encounters all of these kind of symbolic threats about, money and loneliness and illness, and it's
Wow.
pretty amazing.
Yeah. And when is that showing?
That's showing on October 12th. We'll have the premiere, and it's all the film screenings are at the Regent Square Theater.
Regent Square, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic local theater.
Okay.
Love to be working with them.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And so that, of course, is not the only film. Well, you and I talked about something else that is also not as notable. Romero made a series of sports documentaries, TV sports documentaries.
Yeah, which not all of which were seen in Pittsburgh, though a lot of the topics were Pittsburgh-based. He made documentaries about a bunch of Steelers documentaries, and Willie Stargell and Bruno Sammartino, the wrestler.
Oh, Bruno.
That one's a favorite of mine.
Yeah.
But we're showing two of them at the festival. We're showing his O.J. Simpson documentary, which is probably the best known of them. It was passed around on VHS in the 90s, in the O.J. sort of height of notoriety.
For reasons.
Yeah. But I adore the Pittsburgh-based ones. They provide just this amazing portrait of the city in the 1970s and how important these figures were to, Pittsburgh in a time of like a lot of uncertainty and turmoil.
Yeah.
And a time when the Steelers and, Willie Stargell and all these figures were really, there's something kind of heroic in how they were standing in for, how they're, representing the city to the world.
Yeah, of course.
And so one of the first documentaries that he made was called Franco Harris, Good Luck on Sunday.
Oh.
It's wonderful. I love all of these sports documentaries, but this and the Bruno one are my favorites.
Oh yeah.
And we'll be showing that with Franco himself, the Steelers legend.
Oof.
In person at the Regent Square on October 20th.
Okay.
And followed by a conversation. They were lifelong friends, and I'm pretty sure not many people know about the planned collaborations that they had together, including a Bigfoot movie starring Franco.
Oh, man, that would have been great.
It would have been amazing.
I mean, just to know that Franco Harris and George Romero were good friends throughout their lives, and I don't know, I just can't even imagine them just sitting around talking about the possibility of a Bigfoot movie and how it would play out and how Franco would play Bigfoot. Like,
I don't know if he was going to play Bigfoot or somebody fighting Big. I don't know.
So It kind of reminds me of like Arnold Schwarzenegger's like early work, like when he has to fight like a man in a bear suit, like that kind of thing. But yeah, of course you're also showing his most well-known films.
Yeah, we're kicking things off with Night of the Living Dead, and one of the great things about doing this series in Pittsburgh is that so many people who worked on them are still around.
Yeah.
So, when you see Night of the Living Dead, October 11th at the Regent Square Theater,
Yep.
Then Johnny himself, Russ Striner, will be there to introduce the movie. And on Saturday when we show October 12th, when we show Day of the Dead before the amusement park, then we'll have both Laurie Cardill and John Amplis there. And
very nice.
A bunch of guests throughout the week. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And we really hope, I mean, those are the better known names, but we really hope that this is an opportunity. Like George, he touched so many lives in Pittsburgh. So much of today's film industry just traces back to people working on his movies. Like he brought all of his productions to Pittsburgh. Even, I think it was Monkey Shines that had studio money. Most of his stuff was
definitely did.
independently produced, but he brought all of them to Pittsburgh and gave a lot of people, their first shots, or gave them work at a time when there wasn't a ton of filmmaking in Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah.
And we really hope that this can be an opportunity for like all those people to come out and just have a good time.
Yeah, no, and it's not. I've talked to Russ. I've talked to John Russo. For anybody who's curious, I did an oral history of Night of the Living Dead.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, if you haven't read it, dig it up in the archives.
Yeah, it ran last year for the 50th anniversary, and we did a big coloring issue for it, and it was a really fantastic issue. And Russ and John and the other people I talked with were great.
Lisa's texting me instructions. Your face was blocked.
Nobody wants to see my face, except for Lisa, apparently. But thank you, Josh, our producer, Josh. Everybody. Well, now I lost my train of thought. Thanks a lot, Lisa.
Way to go, Lisa.
You were talking about the coloring issue, the oral history.
Okay. So anyway, look up the oral history. It's great. It's very extensive. But so you're also showing some of his more, I guess, like cult.
Yeah.
Like I think Night Riders. Is the Crazies cult? It's pretty cult.
Crazies is pretty cult. Yeah.
Because they did a remake of it. I remember in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it was fine. It had a scene where somebody got attacked while going through a car wash, which is that's a good scene. Like
in the original, isn't the car wash?
No, in the new one.
I don't remember that.
It's the only thing I remember about the remake.
I remember the hospital scene. I don't remember.
I love the original though.
I've never seen it.
It was shot out in Evans City.
Of course.
It's very zombie-ish. It's about a government-made virus escapes into Evans City's water supply.
Of course.
And it's driving people crazy, making them super violent. And it begins with one of the most brutal opening scenes, in American cinema, with a father going crazy with an axe in a picturesque Evans City farmhouse type place, and
always a farmhouse with Romero.
Shot from the point of view of two kids who are trying to figure out what's going on. It's pretty remarkable.
Okay. Yeah, I've never seen the original. I've seen the remake, so now I feel like I have to check it out.
I love the original.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, Night Riders is kind of a weird one too. Is that? I think it's futuristic. It's dystopian.
It's a very personal film.
Oh, okay.
about the need to maintain one's artistic independence in the face of corporate dominance, told through the the medium of a motorcycle jousting troupe that does Ren fairs.
Okay,
Starring a very young and very handsome Ed Harris.
What?
It's a remarkable movie. It's
wow. Okay, I didn't.
I mean, the more research that I do into Romero, and we haven't mentioned it, but the Pitt Library System acquired massive Romero archive, and we're having like a celebration at Hillman Library that's free and open to the public, and it'll be a blast on October 23rd.
Yeah.
And the more that I start to dig into that and just kind of do independent research, you realize, like, George, weird dude.
What?
Weird dude. He just had such idiosyncratic interests, and you know, like you get the feeling, like you read about and you start flipping through all of the unmade projects, and like,
oh, I can't even imagine.
I mean, there's about 100 unproduced scripts and treatments and that sort of thing.
Oh my goodness.
He was super just kind of hyper productive. Just not all of them. I mean, a small portion of them ever got made into movies, but you just get the feeling that he really felt like hemmed in by zombies.
Oh, I would imagine, yeah.
And he used, like a film like Night or Day of the Dead. They harnessed the zombie genre for just like very strange and interesting kind of purposes. But, like there's, like he wrote a screenplay for like an epic treatment of The Stand, the Stephen King.
Oh, really?
They had a bunch of unrealized projects together.
That's amazing.
And they couldn't get funding because even though it was a horror movie, nobody wanted to give the zombie guy funding for like a big horror project, even at like the height of Stephen King, like power.
Yeah.
And so occasionally something will slip through, like Night Riders, where he got to make this, this 2.5-hour movie that's just like, it's so strange, but it feels so just like authentically George Romero. Like he's getting to make something really close to his heart, and it's such a strange choice for that, like very personal kind of expression. And I really love that about Night Riders.
Yeah, I think I confused it with something else because that.
But it's one of the few films he got to make that wasn't horror.
Right. Yeah.
But it was still kind of marketed as horror-ish because.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you even look at the poster or
looks ominous, right?
Yeah, it definitely looks, and I think that's why I thought, oh, this takes place in a weird, like the 80s vision of the future. But obviously it is not that. But yeah, so the archives, we actually wrote about that when they first announced it.
Last spring, yeah.
Last spring. And then this is just, so it's not completed, like officially kind of like released yet. It's kind of
they're still processing.
Yeah.
It's so big that, they spent the summer just cataloging everything.
Right.
And are now, they're doing the processing and like organizing it, and so it should be available like to the public in the spring.
Right. Yeah.
This is with them, working like madmen to like to get it ready. But
and this is something, I mean, yeah, and this is pretty vast because not only you mentioned, unrealized scripts, treatments, things like that. This is props, memorabilia. I mean, just
yeah, and we'll have a bunch of, like, obviously a tiny portion of this, like gigantic thing, but we'll have a bunch of really fun stuff on display at Hillman on the 23rd during the party.
Awesome. Yeah.
Is
that open to the public?
That is open to the public. Anybody can come.
Yeah, if you want to go hang out at the Hillman Library and look at some cool movie stuff.
It is a party.
Yeah.
It's not just a night at the university library. There will be zombies walking around and refreshments and music
a gala.
and activities.
I called it a gala.
Okay.
That's what it is. No, I'm just joking. No, that sounds amazing though. It sounds really fun. I haven't been to the Hillman Library since I was at Pittsburgh at Pitt. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of like what else in terms of what we could talk about George Romero.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's also a screening at the Science Center.
Yeah, the Dawn of the Dead 3D. It's a new
Wow.
It's a new transfer to 3D that'll be showing the 25th and 26th.
Yes, that weekend.
So, that should be a blast, and any chance to see stuff on that gigantic screen is always a blast.
Yeah, and that's the original Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
oh wow. So had it ever shown in 3D before, or is this?
It's screened. I think it's screened in Monroeville last, like at the Mall Theater.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn of the Dead was shot at the Monroeville Mall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey guys, did you hear?
Yeah. And so it's screened there last spring, I think. In
Okay.
3D.
Okay. No, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a, I mean, I'm a little biased because I'm a huge horror fan, and I actually went to a zombie walk years and years ago at the Monroeville Mall because they used to try to do these record-breaking zombie walks.
Did they break records?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't think the one I walked in was the record breaker.
Right.
And I'm trying to think. I was like, were we breaking another record? Was there another zombie walk that they were like, okay, Pittsburgh has to be the one?
Yeah, I'd imagine the first phone call to like Guinness World Headquarters are like, I don't know, zombie walk? I guess.
We have 12 people, and they're like, all right, that sounds pretty big. Yeah, it was really fun, and they basically shut down the mall. And I mean, there were people. I remember when I was walking through the mall, and I would walk past stores, like I would walk by, like Hollister or something, and there'd be employees in there with like the doors closed, just kind of looking out and watching us like, what are these freaks up to? But yeah, it is a lot of fun, and it's crazy because I think that hardcore horror fans do make pilgrimages to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
To go. I remember I saw the comedian Patton Oswalt, and he's a big nerd, of course, and he was talking about going to Monroeville Mall and walking around and just being like, where's the ice skating rink? Where's the weird gun store? Because I mean, the mall obviously is not the same, but yeah, I think, just this idea that people, and Evans City, the way you kind of kicked off this festival was the Living Dead weekend in Evans City, where the cemetery opening for Night of the Living Dead was shot.
Right. And this year they were celebrating, they have kind of different focuses every year, and they were celebrating the Crazies, which was also shot in Evans City. And there's something kind of uncanny about having seen, all these Romero movies a million times and then just going around Pittsburgh and like having this like vague kind of spark of recognition.
Yeah.
Now at the Monroeville Mall, they have a little plaque honoring George, which is really lovely. The outside looks the same, but the inside has been completely overhauled.
Yeah, there's not a lot of the fun stuff that I think they even had like an elevator. That might have been a free elevator, but just all the stuff that you see in the movie. Yeah, it's not the same.
I believe the last like original piece was there's like a footbridge.
The footbridge, yeah.
Which I think the Heinz History Center has now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like the Living Dead Museum, which is out in Evans City, was originally in Monroeville Mall, I believe.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was kind of like a storefront, and it had a couple items, and then it had a bunch of merchandise, like they have like Monroeville zombies, hockey jerseys and things like that, which is in Zack and Miri, one of the movies that was made in Pittsburgh. They're wearing them in the movie, and it's in that a lot of that movie was filmed in and around the Monroeville Mall.
Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, Zack and Miri is very Pittsburgh centric. Zack and Miri Make a Porno, I should say the entire title, but
well, there's an interesting kind of disconnect with Romero in Pittsburgh because horror fans around the world are like associate George Romero with the city of Pittsburgh, just like very intimately. Like everybody knows about the Monroeville Mall, but I still feel like there's a lot of the city that doesn't really that isn't really, like cognizant of how
Right.
of this, like just like how central George was to filmmaking in Pittsburgh for decades. And
Yeah.
that, like when there are, like tourism ad campaigns based around Pittsburgh as the zombie capital of the world and like that
Yeah.
sort of thing, it's not necessarily reaching, the people who live in my neighborhood in Squirrel Hill.
I mean, it's kind of ubiquitous in a lot of ways where, or I guess you could even, maybe people see it as a novelty, like a fun fact about Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Without really like diving into it. I think unless you have an invested interest in film and horror film,
Yeah.
you're probably not going to dive any deeper than, oh yeah, Night of the Living Dead. Cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was really thrilled in the article that you repeated the phrase Hollywood on the Mon, which is something that I found doing research about Romero and just like filmmaking in Pittsburgh in the early 70s comes up a few times. Like, the way for complicated, like unfortunate reasons,
Yeah.
the copyright was removed from Night of the Living
Yeah.
Dead, so the amount of profit that anybody made off of it was smaller, minuscule compared to what it
Right.
actually earned.
Yeah.
But the way to make money off of it would be to cash in and go to Hollywood.
Right. Yeah.
Like that is a, on a tiny budget that I raised myself, I managed to make this, giant, massive hit.
Yeah.
That's a good calling card for a Hollywood studio.
Right.
But George and his collaborators like Russ Streiner and Gary Streiner and John Russo were really dedicated to trying to build a film industry
Yeah.
in Pittsburgh. And, you see all these stories in like the Post-Gazette and stuff, interviewing them about their latest project or their new plans. And, a phrase like trying to build a Hollywood on the Mon
Yeah.
comes up a bunch. And I love that. But it's also, it's a good indication of who George was.
Right.
He wanted to remain independent. He didn't want to have to deal with studio interference or studio assignments.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But he also he liked Pittsburgh. He wanted to build something here. Like he wasn't interested in going to Hollywood. That didn't, I've talked to like some of his collaborators at the time and just like wouldn't, like, yeah, no, it wouldn't have occurred to him that was
Yeah.
something that that you would leave Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And I should point out, like, that was really unusual. That was kind of
Especially
unprecedented
back then. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the late 60s, early 1970s. Like,
Yeah.
now we're sort of used to the idea that, a filmmaker from, I don't know, like someplace in North Carolina or something like that
Yeah.
can put together a feature film and, like work among, work with independent sources of financing and kind of build a career outside of Los Angeles or New York. But, you go back and read all of the news stories about Night of the Living Dead, and there's just this kind of, there's a novelty to it.
Oh yeah. For
That
sure.
a feature film was being made in Pittsburgh. Like, there may have been something before that, but it was like all the publicity and all of the, reporting from 1968 call it the first feature film to come out of Pittsburgh. And
To
like,
entirely come out of Pittsburgh.
to entirely come out of
Yeah,
like not,
because there were definitely like.
there was stuff shot here.
Yeah.
But this was an independent film made by Pittsburghers.
Yeah.
Shot in the Pittsburgh area. So I feel like there is like some. It's certainly the first notable film.
Yeah.
or
It's
the first
very
major
notable.
film, the first influential film, the first film that got like worldwide distribution
Yeah.
to come out of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. There's a documentary called Birth of the Living Dead that really, really goes into the making of Living Dead from, pre-production to production to post, and it is amazing. I mean, George Romero was such a character. He's kind of like your weird New York grandpa, and he's just like, he just jokes around, and like he's talking about how completely low tech so much of Night of the Living Dead was. Just, and even kind of makes fun of some of the effects.
Squibs were new technology. That was
Squibs,
for
yeah.
them. That was like cutting edge in
Yeah.
1968.
But it was very much a community effort.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very much people wanted to be involved and people wanted to make it happen. And they talk about one of the producers was just some guy from the area, and they needed to get equipment over. There was a creek, I think, near the farmhouse where they were filming. And they're like, well, we can't just keep hauling equipment over this creek. And he's like, yeah, I'll build you a bridge. And he went and he like built them a little bridge. And like, just, I think there's something so incredible about that, where this really is a Pittsburgh film, not just in the sense that it was made here, but it was made by this community.
Yeah. And, for, I think for the zombie movies in particular, because, in order for zombies to be like a real threat, you need a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, you'll just like run into people who are like, oh yeah, I was a zombie in
Or like, my
Day
mom
of the
was a
Dead.
zombie in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is I think Carl Kurlander, who's like a pretty big, he's a pretty big film guy. He wrote St. Elmo's Fire.
Yeah,
He taught at
yeah,
Pitt. I think his mother was actually
In Season of the Witch.
Oh, she was in Season of the Witch?
She was in Season of the Witch, yeah.
Oh, which is another George Romero film that's
Yep.
not very well known. Yeah.
That was his first attempt at making like an explicitly feminist film,
Oh, wow.
using witchcraft as a way of kind of talking about the oppressive patriarchy in the early 1970s.
Wow, George.
Fascinating movie.
It's streaming, I think, on Amazon Prime.
Or
I've
you
seen
could
it.
see it at a movie theater.
Or you could see it in a movie theater.
At the Regent Square, say on that Tuesday, October 15th, I think.
Okay.
Do you have
there's
all
a schedule
these?
online.
You've mentioned probably like 10 events.
Yeah.
Are they listed online
yeah,
somewhere
yeah,
for
yeah.
people
Sure,
to
yeah.
reach that we can post
We
later?
were getting there, Josh.
Well, listen, I want to go to some of them, and I want to make sure that I have
Joshua.
access to it.
Doing such a bad job here of getting the word out. But no,
Yeah.
if you go to
It's a lot to remember.
romerolives.org,
There you go.
that romerolives.org,
Okay.
romerolives.org.
RomeroLives.org.
Yeah, and that'll take you to the Romero Foundation's website and all of the events, the amusement park, everything in the film series, and all of the affiliated events that are
Yeah.
taking place, there's a lot.
Yeah. And it's how are we on time, Josh? We good? Okay.
Good.
Then we can keep talking. So also we're doing something fun here just to kind of honor this huge event and this great filmmaking pioneer. We're doing 31 Days of the Undead, where we're trying to cover a different piece of zombie media every day throughout October. It's already started. So the story about Romero Lives was our first story that came out on October 1st. So I wrote something about the Japanese zombie horror comedy, One Cut of the Dead.
It's just a total blast. Love that movie.
It's an incredible movie. It was it wasn't widely distributed for a very long time.
It was a huge hit in Japan.
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
And now it's streaming. I know it's streaming on Shudder.
It's on Shudder. I think you can maybe buy hard copies of it or possibly, get a streaming copy off of like iTunes or something.
Right.
But yeah, Shudder kind of has an exclusive deal, like an exclusive streaming deal. I have a Shudder account because I'm a horror nerd. And then Alex Gordon, our managing editor, he just did one about Zombievers. He was not that crazy about it. It's a horror comedy in the only description sense. He didn't seem too amused by it.
I mean, I was aware that movie existed, but if you told me that it was just a poster, I would have believed you.
Yeah, that's definitely in the the sizzle.
I haven't seen any evidence that the actual movie behind the poster actually exists.
Oh, it exists, and it's bad.
Would Dead Alive be considered a zombie movie of
Oh, yeah.
sorts? I mean, they definitely, they're bitten by whatever that weird rat thing is.
Oh, I
and then
love
they
that
become
movie.
possessed. And that's what's his name?
That's
Peter
Peter
Jackson. Yeah.
Hey guys, you know the Lord of the Rings movies? You might want to see what that guy made before that.
Does that still hold the blood record? Most blood used in a.
That's a lot.
I mean, there's more goop in that movie than most.
There's
others.
a lot of good. Yeah.
I don't know
yeah.
how it competes with Evil Dead, which those are two movies that I get confused sometimes just because of the titles.
Yeah.
Or Evil Dead 2, I think. That's
Evil Dead
just
2, yeah.
torrents of blood.
Well,
Have you guys seen Zombie Lake? I'm just trying to throw out some other topics for us
Zombie
to cover for the zombie, but we have a whole
No.
31 days.
Yeah.
It's a French movie. It's certainly not a comedy.
It's French.
It's French.
A
Parlez-vous?
zombie. I can't
Nazi
remember the-
Nazi zombies rise out of a lake
Oh,
at a
man.
campground. There's a lot of like sensual love scenes between zombies.
Well, it's French, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's got to be sexy.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's funny because there's.
Check out
there's
Zombie Lake, 1981.
Oh, 81? Oh, I do know this
Whoa.
movie. Yeah,
Okay.
I've heard of it. I've never seen it. Well, because there's
Woof.
there's another Nazi zombie movie, Dead Snow.
Yeah.
Which
That's kind of newish, isn't it?
Yeah,
it
it's-
came out.
10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
just about-
I
it's
consider
not-
that newish
It's-
compared to Zombie Lake.
It's pretty great. There's a sequel, Dead Snow, I believe called Red Dead, where zombie Nazis battle with zombie Soviets.
Huh.
It's kind of
Alright.
insane. That is a.
Historically accurate.
It's very accurate. It is. It's not family friendly. Let me just say that much.
Yeah,
Neither
right.
of those movies are family friendly. A lot of fun though. Yeah, it's kind of insane because when Alex and I, because we kind of spearheaded this whole 31 Days of the Undead, we were like, is there enough? Is there enough to
Oh my
talk
God,
about?
yes.
And it's like, yeah. Have you been on literally any streaming site?
And the deeper you dig, the better they get, and weirder they get. That's
They
why
get-
I think it's like let's, skimming the surface of the popular ones is fun, and everybody wants to talk about them. But it's when you get into the real nitty gritty of like,
Yeah, it gets
whoa,
real
how did
weird.
that thing get made? Why is that on media? Like, how did that exist in media? How is that recorded to
Why is
anything?
this immortalized?
yeah,
on
how does that
film?
exist?
Yeah, it is, and it's kind of crazy to think, a movie as bad as it is, Zombieverse, has its origins in Night of the Living Dead, and Romero. It's like it makes me wonder, like, because Romero passed away in 2017,
17. Yeah.
and I wonder, like, did he watch Zombieverse and think, this is all because of me?
He was, let's say, ambivalent about the the just like glut of zombie
Oh, for sure.
entertainment in the 2000s.
Well, because he was always adamant that they were ghouls, which it's like, no, sir, they are zombies. But I mean, because like the traditional zombie, I mean, there were zombie movies before Night of the Living Dead came out, but they weren't.
Yeah.
They were more sort of like.
It was Haitian. It was
Haitian,
specifically
yeah.
like voodoo.
Yeah.
And, I'm friends with a scholar, Sarah Juliet Lauro, who's written a really fantastic book on zombies, like in the sort of like Haitian tradition.
Yeah.
She very adamantly maintains that sort of like colonialist history
Oh
is
yeah.
there in, all the way up to like The Walking Dead. It's there in the modern zombie. But
Yeah.
that's not what Night of the Living Dead was conceived to be.
No, not at all. Yeah.
They, refer to them as ghouls, as
Yeah.
you said. They're just sort of corpses that get up and start walking.
Because I think with when you talk about the Haitian idea of zombies, it's very deliberate. There's a process in order to make that happen, and it's not at all. I think a lot of, like in the case of Night of the Living Dead and some other ones, it's kind of nobody really knows what happened, and nobody knows why this is happening. These hordes of the undead.
Yeah, I mean, in the original, there's that there's that newscast that posits that maybe it has something to do with like space radiation or something like that.
Yeah.
But he drops that in subsequent. Like, it's much more
Right.
interesting that the explanation is, well, maybe there's no more room in hell or something.
I mean, well, because and then there were later ones like Return of the Living Dead, which is
Which is a blast.
that's where the brain eating I
Yeah.
think came from.
Is that the one in the 80s?
Yeah.
Okay, was he involved in that one?
No, but it refers back to Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I remember watching that one and thinking, well, what is going on? Aren't they in like a basement of a lab?
Yeah, and then like the specimens come alive.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good, like
It's
in an
great
entertaining
movie.
way.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't even mention Tom Savini. I feel like leaving him out of this discussion is really unfair.
Yeah.
Is he involved at all or no?
Well, he's on the board for the Romero Foundation.
Okay,
and
yeah.
Very supportive, but he and, like Greg Nicotero, so they both came through the, Romero, like, filmmaking family in the 70s and early 80s to become, two of the most, like, not just, like, in demand, but, like, genuinely influential and important makeup effects artists
definitely.
in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Tom was working with George from Martin was their first collaboration where Tom was an actor and also did makeup effects, and then he did it on Dawn and Creepshow.
Yeah.
These are whenever possible George would work with Pittsburghers.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of Pittsburgh filmmakers got their first gigs on a Romero movie. And that's, the case for Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero, these two just like legendary figures in horror.
Yeah.
Who both have been very busy lately because they're working on the new Creepshow TV show.
Yeah, on Shudder.
On
again.
Shudder, yeah. Which is just such a blast.
Yeah. CP Live, brought to you by Shudder. No. Oh my God, I wish I had Shudder money. Yeah, well, it's interesting too because like Savini, I mean, he didn't just work on Romero films. I mean, he's worked on Friday the 13th and all these like amazing, like, huge horror hits. I mean, he's very central to a lot of very like classic horror.
Yeah, he kept working throughout. Like he's still working, but like it's kind of difficult to conceive of horror in the 1980s without Tom Savini.
Oh yeah, 100%.
He's the one who did all of the effects in, like you said, Friday the 13th and The Burning and Maniac and on and on and on.
Yeah. Oh, Maniac.
And then Greg Nicotero, I think the first film he worked on, who's also on the Romero Foundation board.
Right.
I think the first film he worked on was Day of the Dead.
That was the one in the bunker.
Yeah. And it's one of the, like, not only did he create Creepshow, but he was one of the driving forces behind The Walking Dead, and has also worked on just a zillion things. These are both of them. You look at their IMDb pages, and just the number of films they've worked on is it's staggering.
Yeah, no, it's pretty incredible, and I mean, just to think that all kind of started here
in Pittsburgh. Yeah. I found a really so there was a documentary on the making of Creepshow, and on the Blu-ray there is a special feature that includes like an interview with Tom Savini from I think the 1980s.
Oh yes.
Where he's just strolling through Bloomfield.
Where I think he still lives.
I don't know where he lives, but that's what I hear.
I know he goes to the Bloomfield pool. I have it on good authority, but anyway, go ahead.
And just so he's doing the interview, just walking and talking, and I didn't grow up in Pittsburgh. I moved here a year ago, and there's Patty Cake Bakery, and that's Starbucks. Of course, that Starbucks with the big marquee used to be a movie theater, and it's just the density of Pittsburghness in the DNA of modern horror is just delightful to discover.
It really is. Oh man, Patty Cake Bakery's been around since the 80s? Wow.
I don't know when the interview was.
But I mean, I believe it.
2000, I can tell that. But
okay. All right. Well, how are we on time, Josh?
You could do 15 minutes. You could do 20 minutes. You could end it now. It's your call. There's nothing behind us. There's nobody waiting.
Okay.
The internet's the Wild West.
All right. Well, I guess we're gonna be.
I have a question. Maybe a little more Romero stuff. I guess the portrayal of a black protagonist was very rare in the 60s.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. With Night of the Living Dead. Just wanted to bring that up and see it. I was that, with so much of it being, these are kind of my friends, these are the people around me, was it as much intentional as, well, maybe this is Dwayne's just my friend and I know him, he's an actor, or?
Well, he wasn't like a friend before the shooting. He auditioned, and
because he wasn't from Pittsburgh. I think he flew in
here. Well, I think he was going to school at Duquesne.
Okay. I can't remember.
I
know
really
we talked
should.
about it. I know I talked about it in the oral history, but I can't remember.
But the character was written, presumed to be white, just a truck driver, and so there wasn't that sort of intention from the beginning to make a kind of, incisive social critique on that level. But you don't cast a black man as a hero who punches, like a white patriarch and then shoots him.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Spoiler.
For a 51-year-old film. Yeah.
Guys, if you haven't seen it by now.
If you haven't seen it by now, see it on October 11th.
There you go.
At the Regent
October
Square
11th.
Theater, romerolives.org.
Very nice.
But you don't make that casting decision without realizing something about what it means.
Right.
And then you don't end the film in the way that it ends, and with imagery that, very clearly recalls like the kind of civil rights imagery that, specifically like the Southern sheriffs and like, with the German shepherds and the posse and all that. You don't do that without realizing that it's going to mean something.
Right. Well, and I mean, there's a story that that they always tell when that comes up, where when they were driving the film to New York City to distribute it, they heard on the radio that Martin Luther King Jr. had died.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and or had been assassinated. So
there feel like Night of the Living Dead really feels like 1968 to me. Not just that it is, not just that it's talking about racism and, just kind of the state of the nation in some ways, but that like that kind of apocalyptic horror movie is maybe the most appropriate way for talking about what society felt like in 1968.
Right. Yeah.
And so like Dwayne Jones, Romero has always insisted, he's just the best actor who showed up. But he clearly learned from his experience making the movie and used the horror genre to become primarily a vehicle for social critique.
Right.
Dawn of the Dead is a clear, just kind of hilarious satire that's just poking fun at capitalism and American society.
Really.
And Day of the Dead is all about, toxic, just utterly toxic, violent masculinity and misogyny. And, he would do that throughout his career, which I worry makes them sound like they're not all that fun.
Oh, they're very fun. Yeah.
But, I mean, I think it's also important that, one of the reasons why he was so good at using the horror genre to make these kind of social critiques is that he never tried to transcend the genre. These are movies that have the same kind of appeal that any horror movie would have. They're scary and gross and kind of fun. Yeah. But there was never a contradiction for him between a kind of sort of populist, audience-pleasing sort of genre cinema and having something to say. He wanted to talk to the people who, like horror movies, who like populist movies, who like, to be entertained. He never saw, there was never any attempt to try to go over their heads.
Yeah.
He wasn't making movies for MoMA, even if MoMA was appreciating the stuff that he was making.
Yeah, it is. it's one of those things where, I mean, horror obviously existed before Night of the Living Dead. I mean, there were definitely horror movies, and they definitely spoke to some themes. You and I talked about this a little bit, where you know, like Dracula, you know, there's some, you can say like, oh, this is about like xenophobia and about being afraid of sort of.
Yeah.
But I think like with Night of the Living Dead, I think it speaks to it maybe a little more directly.
I think there's an intentionality to it. Like it's using horror as a way to talk about society.
Right.
Like, you know, one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with horror is that it uses this extremely like visceral genre to talk about like the kinds of anxieties that are just sort of permeating a culture. And so it's always, any horror film is going to reflect the culture that produces it.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
it's going to tell you a lot about what people are worried about in, you know, 1931 for Dracula, or, you know, like the 1950s for Creature from the Black Lagoon, or Godzilla, or you know, House of Wax, or in 1960. You know, in my class at Pitt, we watched Psycho this week.
Oh yeah.
It sure tells you a lot about, you know, conceptions of gender and sexuality in 1960.
Yeah.
To watch Psycho, which definitely was not Hitchcock's intention. Like, or you know, the screenwriters or anybody involved was not thinking that they wanted to make a statement.
No.
About, you know, about gender and sexuality in 1960.
Yeah.
I do think that Romero, like, that he saw horror as a way, because it has this, you know, like visceral appeal, that it's a way of talking about important social, of making important social critique.
Yeah.
In a way that reaches people in a different way than, like, you know, a more like quote unquote tasteful, like, legal drama, or you know, like I don't know, like some more like polite, highbrow kind of cinema.
Yeah, which, and you talked about so one of his, and I actually tried to find this, and I couldn't find any mention of it anywhere. But one of his earliest films was actually a fable called Wine of the Fawn.
Wine of the Fawn, yeah.
Which,
no, it was a project. It was the first feature film that George and the rest of the Latent Image group.
Oh, I see. Okay.
With Russ and Gary and John.
Okay.
That they tried to make and never got funding for.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You know, him becoming a horror director was kind of just pure chance, based on they were able to get funding for Night of the Living Dead. That they weren't for Wine of the Fawn.
I wonder why. You said it was like a Bergman-esque fable.
Yeah. Like, some of those impulses, I think, come out in the amusement park. But after several years of being a horror filmmaker and sort of honing that vocabulary.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that Night of the Living Dead, you know, as much as it was kind of a double-edged sword, because he, you know, always wanted to break out of the horror genre. It's not that he looked down on it, but you know, you want some variety.
You don't want to just be pigeonholed.
But it was, and again, like, he was pigeonholed even more than most, like, not just horror, but specifically zombie movies.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, as much as he did with the genre, like, you know, he always, like, he had a wide variety of interests.
Yeah.
But I think that Night of the Living Dead suited his sensibilities more than something like Wine of the Fawn.
Yeah.
Like, I think he was always best when he was just, like, speaking to like we talked about last week, like, one of the reasons why he stuck around Pittsburgh is because he really saw himself in the city.
Right.
You know, like, he felt like a Pittsburgher in a way that he never felt like a New Yorker, and wouldn't have felt like a Los Angelino, you know?
No, absolutely not.
And he wanted to make films for people like him and his friends in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Like, when he was speaking to this kind of just, like, general audience, I think that's when he was best in his career.
Definitely.
And he did that, to just like an extraordinary degree with Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
Just everything sort of coming together. Yeah.
Okay. No. That's very beautifully put. As much as talking about as beautifully put as, talking about a zombie movie.
Yeah, well, it's so funny because now, like I said, I showed it to my students a couple of weeks ago, and there's nothing shocking to them. But like I talked to my mom and my aunt who were kids at the time, and it was the most like traumatizing movie they'd ever seen.
I can imagine. Well,
like they still remember seeing it.
Yeah.
Whenever it was that they actually got to see it.
It was shocking. Yeah. Because before then, like, horror movies were like pretty tame. They were pretty bloodless and like.
There was blood, but it was it was largely on like a kind of sleazy grindhouse drive-in sort of circuit.
Yeah.
But there's a famous Roger Ebert review of Night of the Living Dead, which is super worth tracking down.
Oh.
That's just him being morally scandalized. Because it was playing at a theater, just like a normal theater, and kids were there. It was a matinee, and he's just like, it was the downfall of Western civilization. Because Night of the Living Dead had crossed over. It wasn't just like a sleazy, like grindhouse place that was, probably frequented by the sort of people that Roger Ebert would just consider, like weirdos and perverts and that sort of thing. Like,
which is weird because he hung out with Russ Meyer.
Yeah, I know.
What? Like, okay, sir.
Yeah, well, but it came out in a time in between the dissolution of the production code and the advent of the MPAA rating system.
Yeah.
So
you're talking about the Hays Code, correct?
Yeah. So they threw in this was a few month window.
Yeah.
And that's when it happened to be completed and released, and so somehow was grandfathered in. But they it's fairly late in the production process, threw in a bunch of shots of people. Or of zombies, of ghouls. Eating, various body parts and, playing with intestines on the grass and stuff.
Yeah.
And, for at least one generation of young moviegoers, that haunted their nightmares for for decades.
And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, right?
Well, I think we can probably stop there.
Yeah.
Let's just stop on that note. That's perfect.
This was a blast. Thank you so much,
Of
Amanda.
course. Yeah. Well, I'm always game to talk about horror, so this was definitely up my alley. So just before we go, you want to just repeat the dates and where people can find information about the events?
Yeah. So go to romerolives.org. We've got all the information there for the film series, the amusement park premiere, the Franco Harris event, and the library gala, as well as all the affiliated events.
Okay.
But the film series is October 11th through 20th at the Regent Square Theater.
Yeah.
Fantastic local nonprofit theater.
Yeah.
In the Regent Square neighborhood.
Yeah, and of course there's the Science Center as well, and that's closer to the end of the month. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're also doing a series of horror films this month. They'll be introducing Evil Dead 2 tomorrow night.
Okay.
Screening on IMAX, which will be a blast.
Yeah, so if you want to see torrents of blood on the very, very big screen.
The biggest possible screen.
There you go. All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us, Adam.
Thank you,
great.
Amanda. This was so much fun.
All right. So thank you for listening and kind of watching City Paper Live. Join us next week.